The silverware clinked against the porcelain plates as I set the table for Sunday barbecue, the same ritual I'd maintained for 37 years. Even after Nicholas's death 2 years ago, I continued hosting these gatherings, though the warmth had slowly drained from them like water from a cracked vase. At 61, my hands still moved with practiced efficiency, folding napkins into perfect triangles, arranging the good china that my children would inherit someday, if they deserved it. The scent of charcoal and lighter fluid drifted through the kitchen window as my son-in-law Finley fired up the grill. I could hear him talking to Edge, my other son-in-law, their voices carrying that particular tone men use when they think they're discussing important matters. My daughters, Louise and Gloria, were somewhere in the house, probably upstairs going through my jewelry box again under the pretense of helping me organize. I paused at the kitchen sink, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the oak trees Nicholas had planted when we first moved here. Those trees were saplings then, barely reaching my shoulder. Now they towered over the house, their roots deep and strong, unlike the shallow connections I seem to have cultivated with my own children. The back door slammed shut, and Louise breezed into the kitchen carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers, the kind you grab at checkout when you realize you've forgotten to bring something to your mother's house. Again. "Mom, you look tired," she said, setting the flowers on the counter without looking for a vase. "Maybe it's time to think about scaling back these big dinners. It's a lot of work for someone your age. Someone my age." As if 61 meant I should be shuffling around in slippers, grateful for any crumbs of attention my family threw my way. I said nothing, simply took the flowers and found them a vase, trimming the stems that had already begun to wilt in the heat. Gloria appeared moments later, her designer purse slung over her shoulder like armor. "Edgy's asking about Dad's tools again," she announced without preamble. "They're just sitting in the garage collecting dust. It seems wasteful." Nicholas's tools. The craftsman said he'd bought piece by piece over 20 years, the circular saw he'd used to build Gloria's treehouse, the level that had helped him hang every picture in this house. I felt something cold settle in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "Your father's tools stay where they are. But Mom, Edge could really use them for his contracting work. Dad would have wanted them to be put to good use." The presumption in her voice made my jaw tighten. As if she had any idea what Nicholas would have wanted. As if either of my daughters had spent more than obligatory holidays with their father in his final years, too busy with their own lives to notice how he'd grown quiet, how the light had dimmed in his eyes when they'd rush through visits like items to check off a to-do list. Finley's voice boomed from the patio, calling everyone outside. I wiped my hands on my apron and followed my family into the backyard, where the familiar choreography of Sunday dinner began to unfold. The men clustered around the grill, beers in hand, while my daughters arranged themselves in the patio chairs like queens holding court. I moved between kitchen and patio, refilling drinks, bringing out side dishes, playing the role I'd perfected over decades of marriage and motherhood. The conversation flowed around me in predictable currents. Gloria's yoga instructor certification, Louise's latest kitchen renovation, Finley's golf game, Edgy's complaints about permit delays. I half listened, my attention caught by the way they all seemed so comfortable, so entitled to this space, this meal, my labor. When had I become invisible in my own home? As we settled around the table, Louise raised her wine glass with theatrical flourish. "Actually, we have some news to share." She exchanged a look with Gloria, the kind of loaded glance that made my stomach tighten. "We finally closed on Dad's business." The fork paused halfway to my mouth. Nicholas's construction company, the one he'd built from nothing, working 60-hour weeks for 30 years to provide for our family. After his death, I'd reluctantly agreed to let the girls handle the business affairs while I grieved, trusting them to make decisions in the company's best interest. "We sold Dad's business, Mom," Louise continued, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd just completed an unpleasant but necessary task. "Now that he's gone, that chapter is over." Finley and Edge raised their beers in a toast, as if they were celebrating the end of a war rather than the dissolution of my husband's legacy. The sound of clinking glass felt like ice cracking under pressure. "How much?" The question came out sharper than I'd intended. Louise's smile faltered slightly. $3 million to a company called the Phoenix Group. It was a fair offer, And honestly, the business was becoming a burden. None of us knew how to run a construction company. I set down my fork carefully, the way you place something fragile when your hands are shaking. $3 million. $3 million for Nicholas's life's work, sold without my input, without my knowledge, without my consent. The Phoenix Group. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep in my chest, starting as a chuckle and growing into something that bordered on hysteria. They stared at me as if I'd lost my mind, their faces a mixture of concern and embarrassment. "That's my company," I said when the laughter finally subsided. Silence fell over the table like a lead blanket. Finley's beer can stopped halfway to his mouth. Gloria's fork clattered against her plate. Louise's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning realization, and finally, something that looked like fear. "What do you mean your company?" Edgy asked, his voice tight. I looked around the table at these people, my daughters, my sons-in-law, who had just sold my late husband's business to me without knowing it. The irony was so perfect, so cosmically appropriate, that I almost laughed again. "The Phoenix Group is my company," I repeated, each word deliberate and clear. "I incorporated it 6 months ago. The story spilled out of me then. 2 years of careful planning and quiet maneuvering laid bare. How I'd watched them run Nicholas's company into the ground after his death, spending profits on personal expenses, ignoring maintenance, treating employees like disposable resources. How I'd seen the loyal workers, people who'd been with Nicholas for decades, beginning to look for other jobs as the company's reputation crumbled under my children's mismanagement. I'd started small, reaching out to Nicholas's most trusted foremen, the ones who understood the business from foundation to rooftop. Together, we'd formed the Phoenix Group, poaching the best employees, the most reliable subcontractors, the clients who valued quality over quick profits. While my daughters played at running a business they didn't understand, I was building its replacement from the ashes of their neglect. "Every year, I share half the profits with the employees," I continued, watching their faces grow paler with each revelation. "The rest goes back into the business. It's what Nicholas would have wanted, taking care of the people who took care of us." Gloria found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "You can't be serious." "Deadly serious." I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate with the same precision I'd used to set the table hours earlier. "You wanted to sell Nicholas's business? Congratulations, you just sold it to his widow." The weight of what had happened was beginning to sink in, and I could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. $3 million they'd thought was theirs, now revealed to be mine. A successful business they'd assumed was gone forever, now thriving under my guidance. A mother they'd dismissed as a grieving widow, now revealed as their competitor, and their superior. Louise's chair scraped against the patio stones as she stood abruptly. "This is insane, Mom. You can't just—" "I can't what?" I stood too, and for the first time in years, I felt the full power of my height, my presence, my righteous anger. "I can't protect my husband's legacy? I can't ensure his employees keep their jobs? I can't run a business better than my children who never bothered to learn it?" The sun was setting behind the oak trees, casting long shadows across the patio where we'd shared so many Sunday dinners. But this dinner felt different, final, somehow, as if something fundamental had shifted, and there would be no going back to the careful pretense we'd all maintained. Finley cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the gathering twilight. "Maybe we should talk about this when everyone's had time to process." "There's nothing to process," I interrupted, my voice steady as granite. "The sale is complete. The money is mine. The business is mine. The only question now is what we do next." I looked at each of them in turn. These people who'd shaped my life for so many years, who'd taken my devotion for granted, who'd assumed my grief made me vulnerable rather than dangerous. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, and I realized that for the first time in decades, I didn't feel compelled to fill it with reassurances or apologies. The Phoenix Group had risen from the ashes of their mismanagement, just as I had risen from the ashes of their neglect. The question hanging in the air, unspoken but undeniably present, was whether this family could survive what I'd become. The silence that followed my revelation stretched like a wire pulled to its breaking point. I could hear the neighbor's dog barking in the distance, the hum of the refrigerator through the open kitchen door, the almost imperceptible sound of my daughter's world crumbling around them. Gloria was the first to recover, her lawyer's training kicking in even as her face remained ashen. There has to be some kind of legal issue with this. A conflict of interest or fraud, or there's nothing illegal about buying a failing business, I said, my voice as calm as if I were discussing the weather. Your attorneys handled the sale. My attorneys handled the purchase. Everything was done properly, transparently, and legally. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle. The only thing that wasn't transparent was your assumption that I was too grief-stricken and helpless to understand what was happening to my husband's life work. Louise had sunk back into her chair, her wine glass forgotten in her hand. But why didn't you tell us? Why let us go through with the sale if you were going to? Because you never asked. The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I didn't soften them. In 2 years, neither of you ever asked what I thought about your decisions. You assumed I was too old, too emotional, too female to have an opinion worth hearing. Finley shifted uncomfortably, his beer can now warm and forgotten in his hands. Come on, that's not fair. We were trying to protect you from the stress. Protect me? I turned to face him fully, and he actually took a step back. You were protecting yourselves from having to learn a business you considered beneath you, from having to work with your hands the way Nicholas did, from having to care about anything other than how much money you could extract from his legacy. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. EJ cleared his throat nervously. Look, we all want what's best for the family. Maybe we can work something out. What's best for the family? I repeated slowly. When was the last time any of you asked what was best for me? The question seemed to catch them off guard. Louise opened her mouth, then closed it again. Gloria stared at her hands. The men looked anywhere but at me. When Nicholas was dying, I continued, my voice steady despite the pain those memories brought. Do you remember visiting him in the hospital? Louise, you came twice in 6 weeks. Gloria, you managed 3 visits, but you spent most of them on your phone dealing with your divorce attorney. I walked to the patio railing, looking out at the garden Nicholas had planted, the roses he'd tended, the bird feeder he'd filled every morning until he couldn't anymore. Finley, EJ, you came to the funeral, of course, very respectful. But when did you ever sit with him? When did you ask him about the business he'd built, the workers he cared about, the dreams he had for his legacy? The silence was deafening now, broken only by the sound of wind through the oak leaves. I was there every day, I said, not turning around to face them. Every single day for 8 months. I held his hand through the chemo. I helped him to the bathroom when he was too proud to ask the nurses. I listened when he worried about what would happen to his employees after he was gone. When I turned back, Louise had tears in her eyes, but I felt no satisfaction in seeing them. Tears were cheap. Tears didn't undo 2 years of neglect and dismissal. He made me promise, I continued, to take care of the people who had taken care of us, not you. He knew you'd be fine with your professional careers and your college educations, but Monty Hill, who's worked for us for 15 years and has 3 kids to put through school. Jody Wilkerson, who cleans our offices and sends money to her mother in Guatemala. Paul Wagner, who's been Nicholas's right hand since the company started and is too old to find another job if this one disappeared. Gloria finally looked up. We didn't know. You didn't want to know. I sat down again, but not in my usual chair at the head of the table. Instead, I chose Nicholas's seat, the one I'd left empty for 2 years out of some misplaced sense of propriety, because knowing would have meant responsibility, and responsibility would have meant work. The sun had set completely now, and the patio lights cast harsh shadows across the table. The remains of our dinner sat cooling in the evening air, the potato salad I'd made from scratch, the corn I'd husked by hand, the roles I'd played without question for so many years. Louise wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of mascara across her cheek. So what happens now? You just cut us out? You cut yourselves out, I replied. I'm just acknowledging what you've already chosen. The cruelty in my words was intentional, calculated. I had learned, in the 2 years since Nicholas's death, that kindness was often mistaken for weakness. That accommodation was seen as invitation for further exploitation. That a mother's love, given freely and without condition, could become a weapon used against her. The Phoenix Group employs 43 people, I continued. We've completed 16 projects in the last year, all on time and under budget. We have contracts lined up through next spring, and our reputation in the community has never been stronger. I paused, watching their faces process this information. Nicholas would be proud. Finley leaned forward, his expression shifting from confusion to something that looked like calculation. If the business is doing so well, maybe there's room for family involvement. I mean, Edge and I have skills that could be useful. No, the word came out flat and final, like a door slamming shut. Edge, you're a Finnish carpenter who hasn't worked a job site in 5 years. You've been living off the money Nicholas's company generated while you tried to make it as a consultant. Finley, you sell insurance and play golf. Neither of you has ever shown the slightest interest in construction, except as a source of income you didn't have to earn. Edge's face flushed red. That's not, I've been building my own business with money you took from this one. I pulled a manila folder from my purse, one I'd brought with the vague hope that this conversation might go differently. Instead, I opened it and spread the documents across the table like playing cards. Invoices for materials that were never delivered, payments to subcontractors who never showed up on job sites, equipment rentals for tools that somehow ended up in your personal workshops. The papers rustled in the evening breeze, each one a record of their casual theft, their assumption that Nicholas's assets were their inheritance to claim while he was still breathing. Gloria picked up one of the invoices, her lawyer's eye scanning the details. These could be mistakes. Bookkeeping errors. $73,000 in bookkeeping errors? I gathered the papers back up, my movements precise and controlled. That's just what I could document in the 6 months before Nicholas died. God knows what you took while I was too busy caring for my dying husband to watch you rob him blind. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Louise gasped. Gloria went white. The men looked like they wanted to run. That money could have paid for experimental treatments, I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. It could have bought Nicholas more time, more comfort, more dignity in his final months. Instead, it paid for Edge's truck and Finley's golf membership and Louise's kitchen renovation. The weight of what I was saying, what I was accusing them of, settled over the table like a shroud. They had stolen not just money, but time. Not just profit, but possibility. Not just from the business, but from their dying father. Louise stood up abruptly, her chair falling backward onto the patio stones. I can't. I need to. She ran into the house, leaving the rest of us in uncomfortable silence. I could hear her sobbing in the kitchen, great heaving sobs that might have moved me once. Now they sounded like the tears of someone who'd been caught, not someone who was truly sorry. Gloria looked at the papers in my hands, then at her husband, then at me. What do you want from us, Mom? An apology? The money back? What would make this right? I considered the question seriously, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle piece I was trying to fit into place. What did I want? Justice? Revenge? Acknowledgement? Love? I want you to understand, I said finally, that actions have consequences. That the people you hurt don't always stay hurt. That the mother you dismissed as weak and helpless might surprise you. I stood up, smoothing my dress, gathering my purse and the folder of evidence. I want you to know that Nicholas's legacy is safe. His employees are cared for. His business is thriving. And none of you had anything to do with making that happen. As I walked toward the house, Gloria called after me. Mom, wait. We can talk about this. We can work something out. I stopped at the patio door but didn't turn around. The Phoenix Group is accepting resumes for entry-level positions. 40 hours a week, starting at $15 an hour. If any of you are interested in earning your way back into this family, that's where you can start. The cruelty of the offer was perfect in its precision. My successful, educated, entitled children, applying for manual labor jobs at their father's company, working alongside people they'd considered beneath them, earning a fraction of what they'd been taking without working at all. I left them sitting in the darkness of the patio, among the ruins of their assumptions and the wreckage of their entitlement. Inside the house, Louise was still crying in the kitchen, but I walked past her without stopping. At the front door, I paused to look back at the home Nicholas and I had built together, the place where I'd raised these ungrateful children, where I'd played the role of devoted wife and mother for so many years. Tomorrow, I would put it on the market. After all, the Phoenix Group was looking for a new headquarters, and I knew exactly the right place to build it. 3 weeks later, I stood in the empty living room of what had been my home for 35 years, watching the real estate agent hammer the sold sign into the front lawn. The house had sold in 4 days. Cash offer, no contingencies, $20,000 over asking price. The buyers were a young couple with twin toddlers, full of dreams about the garden they would plant and the memories they would make in these rooms. I felt nothing watching them sign the papers. Not nostalgia, not regret, not even satisfaction. Just the cold efficiency of a woman who had finally learned to see sentimentality for what it truly was. A luxury she could no longer afford. "Mrs. Chen?" The real estate agent approached with her bright professional smile. "The buyers wanted to thank you again for leaving the garden tools and the outdoor furniture. They're so excited to get started on the landscaping. Nicholas's tools. The ones Gloria had wanted Edge to take. The ones that had sat untouched in the garage for 2 years like a shrine to my own inability to let go. Now they would serve their purpose again, helping strangers build something beautiful from the ground up. "Tell them they're welcome," I said, signing the final documents with the cross pen Nicholas had given me for our 20th anniversary. "I hope they make good use of everything." As I drove away from the house for the last time, my phone buzzed with a text from Louise. "Mom, please call me. We need to talk. I've been thinking about what you said about Dad's employees. Maybe there's a way to work together on this." I deleted the message without responding. There had been 7 similar messages over the past 3 weeks, each one a slightly different variation on the same theme: bargaining, pleading, attempting to find some angle that would restore their access to money they had never earned. Not one of them had mentioned grief, or Nicholas, or responsibility for their actions, only concern about their financial futures. The Phoenix Group's temporary headquarters occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse in the industrial district, a far cry from the suburban office park where Nicholas's original company had operated. I liked the honesty of it. Concrete floors, exposed brick walls, the sound of real work happening in the floors below us. No pretense, no corporate theater, just competence and efficiency. Monty Hill looked up from his drafting table as I walked in, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "How'd it go, boss?" "Clean sale," I replied, hanging my coat on the hook behind my desk. "We close next Friday." "Good." He returned to his blueprints, but I caught the slight nod of approval. Monty had been with Nicholas since the beginning, had watched my daughters run the company into the ground with the same sick fascination you might watch a slow-motion car accident. He understood what the house sale meant, the final severing of ties to the old life, the complete commitment to the new one. The afternoon stretched ahead of me, filled with the mundane pleasures of actual work, purchase orders to approve, job site inspections to schedule, a meeting with the bank about expanding our line of credit. For 2 years after Nicholas's death, I had drifted through days like a ghost in my own life. Now every hour had purpose. Every decision had weight and consequence. At 4 o'clock, Jody Wilkerson knocked on my office door. She cleaned the building after hours, but today she stood in my doorway holding an envelope, her usually confident demeanor replaced by something that looked like nervousness. "Mrs. Ruth," she said, using the name she'd called me since Nicholas first introduced us 15 years ago. "I hope you don't mind, but there's someone here to see you. She says she's your granddaughter." I looked up sharply. Neither Louise nor Gloria had children, a fact they'd mentioned repeatedly during their 20s and 30s, as evidence of their sophisticated, child-free lifestyle choices. But standing behind Jody in the hallway was a girl who couldn't be more than 17, with Gloria's dark hair and Nicholas's stubborn chin. "I'm sorry," I said, confused. "I think there's been some mistake?" "No mistake." The girl stepped forward, and I caught a glimpse of a small scar above her left eyebrow, the kind children get from playground accidents. "I'm Angela, Gloria's daughter. Your granddaughter." The words hit me like a physical blow. Gloria's daughter. A granddaughter I had never met, never heard about, never knew existed. I gripped the edge of my desk to steady myself. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Gloria doesn't have children." Angela's laugh held no humor. "Yeah, well, Gloria doesn't have a lot of things she used to have, including a daughter she gave up for adoption when she was 19. 19. I did the math quickly. Gloria would have been a sophomore in college, still financially dependent on Nicholas and me, still calling home every week to complain about professors and roommates and cafeteria food. She had been pregnant and never told us. "May I sit down?" Angela asked, and I realized I'd been staring at her in silence for a full minute. "Of course. Please." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, my mind racing. How do you know about me? Took me 3 years to track down my birth mother," Angela said, settling into the chair with the casual confidence of someone far older than her years. "Turns out Gloria wasn't too happy to hear from me. Told me it was a closed adoption for a reason, and I should respect that boundary." She made air quotes around the last word, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But you're here now." "I'm here because my adoptive parents died in a car accident last year." The words came out matter-of-factly, but I caught the slight tremor in her voice. "And because I spent 6 months trying to connect with my biological family before I realized they didn't want anything to do with me." I studied her face, looking for traces of Nicholas, of myself, of the family she'd been denied. She had Gloria's bone structure but none of her polished presentation. Her clothes were clean but clearly secondhand, her backpack worn at the edges, her sneakers held together with duct tape. "Where are you living now?" I asked. "Anywhere I can. Youth shelter when there's space, friends' couches when there isn't. I age out of the system in 4 months, so I'm trying to figure out what comes next." She shrugged, but I could see the fear she was trying to hide. "I heard about what happened with your company, about how you bought it back from them." Where did you hear that?" "Gloria's not exactly subtle when she's drunk and angry. She called me 2 weeks ago, screaming about how you'd ruined her life and stolen her inheritance. Seemed to think I might have some influence over you." Angela's smile was sharp around the edges. Apparently she forgot that she spent the last year pretending I don't exist. The pieces began to fall into place. Gloria's divorce, the financial pressure that had made stealing from Nicholas's company seem reasonable, the desperation that would drive her to reach out to a daughter she'd abandoned twice. Once at birth, once when Angela had tried to reconnect. "What do you want from me?" I asked, though I thought I already knew the answer. "Honestly, I just wanted to meet you, to see if there was anyone in this family who might actually give a damn." She leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. "I've been reading about your company online, about how you share profits with employees, how you've turned it into something that actually helps people instead of just making money for people who don't work. And I thought maybe you were different. Maybe you were someone who understood what it meant to be thrown away by people who were supposed to love you." The words cut deeper than she probably intended. Thrown away. That's exactly what my daughters had tried to do. Discard me like an outdated appliance that had served its purpose. The parallel between my situation and Angela's was too obvious to ignore. "I can't offer you much," I said carefully. "I don't know anything about being a grandmother. I don't even know if I'm good at being a mother. You raised 2 successful women with college degrees and professional careers. They might be selfish, but they're not stupid or incompetent. Success isn't the same thing as goodness." Angela nodded slowly. "No, it's not. But maybe goodness is something you can learn later in life, if you're willing to try." I looked at this girl, this young woman who shared Nicholas's stubborn chin and my own refusal to accept defeat, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not the desperate, clinging love I'd wasted on my daughters, but something cleaner and more purposeful. "The Phoenix Group is hiring for an apprentice position," I said. "Part-time so you could finish high school. It pays enough to cover a small apartment if you're careful with money." Angela's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. But it's real work. Manual labor, long hours, learning a trade from the ground up. And you'd be working alongside people who've been doing this for decades. They won't give you special treatment because you're the boss's granddaughter. I wouldn't want special treatment." "Good, because you wouldn't get it." I pulled out a business card and wrote my personal cell phone number on the back. "Think about it over the weekend. If you're interested, call me Monday morning." Angela took the card, staring at it like it was made of gold. "Why are you doing this?" I thought about the question seriously before answering. "Because Nicholas would have loved you. Because you deserve a chance that your mother never gave you. And because I paused, looking at this girl who had survived abandonment and loss and was still standing, still fighting. Because maybe we can build something together that's worth more than what we've lost. As Angela left, promising to call Monday, I felt a strange sense of completion. The Phoenix Group had found its newest employee, and I had found something I hadn't known I was looking for. A reason to believe that family could be more than blood, that love could be earned instead of inherited, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to prove themselves worthy of your faith. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter's greed had led them to seek help from the granddaughter they'd never wanted me to know, and now that granddaughter might become the family they'd forfeited through their own choices. The wheel of justice, it seemed, had a sense of humor almost as sharp as its teeth. Angela called at 7:30 Monday morning, exactly 30 minutes before the Phoenix Group office officially opened. I answered on the first ring. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said without preamble, her voice steady despite what I suspected had been a sleepless weekend. "I want the job, but I need to know, are you doing this because you feel sorry for me, or because you think I can actually contribute something?" The question revealed a wisdom born from disappointment, the kind of careful self-protection that comes from being let down by adults too many times. I respected her for asking it directly. "I don't make business decisions based on pity," I replied. "If I thought you'd be a liability, I'd have given you bus fare and my regrets. The Phoenix Group can't afford dead weight, even if it shares my DNA." "Good." The relief in her voice was audible. "When do I start?" 3 hours later, Angela stood in the warehouse wearing steel-toed boots that were clearly new and a hard hat that dwarfed her small frame. Monty Hill looked her up and down with the critical eye of a man who'd trained dozens of apprentices over the years. "You ever swung a hammer?" he asked. "Yes, sir. My adoptive father was a mechanic. He taught me basic tool use before he died." Monty nodded approvingly. "Good. Rule 1. If you don't know how to do something, ask. Rule 2. If you think you know how to do something but you're not sure, ask anyway. Rule 3. Pride gets people hurt on construction sites. Leave it at home." I watched from my office window as Monty began Angela's education in earnest. She was attentive, asked intelligent questions, and didn't flinch when he assigned her to cleaning tasks that most teenagers would consider beneath them. By lunch, she was helping Jody Wilkerson organize the supply room, chatting easily in broken Spanish that made the older woman smile. At 2 o'clock, my phone rang. Gloria's name appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity won out. "Hello, Gloria." "Mom?" Her voice was strained, barely controlled. "We need to talk. Now. I'm at work. Is this an emergency? Don't play games with me. I know Angela's there. I know you hired her." I leaned back in my chair, watching Angela through the window as she carefully measured lumber under Monty's supervision. "And how do you know that?" "Because she called me last night to tell me she was working for her grandmother now. Her real grandmother," she said. "The one who actually cares about family." The spite in Gloria's voice was thick enough to cut with a knife, but underneath it, I heard something else. Fear. Fear that the daughter she'd discarded might have found something valuable that Gloria herself had lost access to. "Angela is a hard worker," I said evenly. "She'll do well here." "This is sick, Mom. Using a troubled teenager to get back at me for business decisions." "Business decisions?" I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Is that what you're calling theft now? Corporate restructuring?" The line went quiet for a moment. Then Gloria's voice came back, smaller and more desperate. "Look, maybe we made some mistakes with the company. Maybe we didn't handle things the way Dad would have wanted. But this is vindictive. You're destroying our family." "I'm not destroying anything that wasn't already broken." I stood up, pacing to the window where I could see Angela learning to use a level. Her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration, just like Nicholas used to do when he was focused. "I'm simply refusing to pretend otherwise. She's my daughter." "No," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "She was your daughter for 9 months. Then she became someone else's daughter for 16 years. Now she's a young woman trying to build a life despite being abandoned by the people who should have protected her. Biology doesn't give you claim to her any more than it gives you claim to Nicholas's money. I was 19. I was in college. I couldn't—" "You couldn't what?" Tell your parents you were pregnant? Ask for help? Trust that we might have supported you? The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I didn't take them back. Instead, you made the decision alone, gave birth alone, and signed those papers alone. You chose to cut us all out of that experience. I was protecting everyone. You were protecting yourself, just like you've been doing ever since. I turned away from the window, unable to watch Angela's earnest concentration while listening to her mother's excuses. The girl down there has been homeless for a year because her adoptive parents died, and her biological mother hung up on her when she asked for help. Where was your protection then? The silence stretched between us, filled with decades of disappointment and missed connections. When Gloria spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. What do you want me to say? That I was wrong? That I should have told you about the pregnancy? That I should have helped her when she called? Her voice cracked. Fine, I was wrong. I should have done all of those things. Is that what you want to hear? What I want, I said slowly, is for you to understand that apologies without changed behavior are just more lies. Angela doesn't need your regret. She needs stability, opportunity, and people who won't disappear when she becomes inconvenient. And you think you can give her that? I looked out at the warehouse floor again, where Angela was now helping Monty carry a sheet of plywood, her small frame straining but determined not to ask for help she didn't need. I think I can give her what Nicholas gave his employees, a chance to earn something through honest work, and the respect that comes with it. Whether that's enough remains to be seen. I want to see her. That's between you and Angela. But if you're planning to show up here and disrupt her work because you're feeling guilty or territorial, you should know that I won't allow it. She's my daughter, Gloria repeated, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Prove it, I said, and hung up. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. Angela worked with the focused intensity of someone who understood that this opportunity might not come again, asking questions when she needed to, but never slowing down the experienced workers around her. At 5 o'clock, as the crew began cleaning up for the day, she approached my office. Mrs. Ruth? She stood in my doorway, her hard hat tucked under her arm, her face streaked with dust but bright with satisfaction. Monty said I did good work today. He said if I keep it up, he might let me help with actual construction next week instead of just prep work. That's high praise from Monty. He doesn't compliment people unless they earn it. Angela nodded seriously. I know. That's why it matters. She hesitated, then stepped closer to my desk. I need to tell you something. Gloria called me last night after I told her about the job. What did she say? The usual guilt trip stuff. How I was betraying her by working for you. How she was my real mother, and you were just using me to hurt her. Angela's jaw tightened. Then she offered me money to quit and come live with her instead. The audacity was breathtaking. Even for Gloria, offering to buy back a daughter she'd discarded, as if Angela were a possession that could be reclaimed with the right price. What did you tell her? I told her that if she'd wanted to be my mother, she shouldn't have hung up on me when I was sleeping in my car last winter. Angela's voice was steady, but I caught the flash of pain in her eyes. I told her that you offered me work, not charity, and that the difference mattered to me. I felt a surge of fierce pride that caught me off guard. This girl, this young woman, understood something my own daughters had never grasped, that self-respect came from earning your place, not inheriting it. How much did she offer you? I asked. $5,000, plus rent on an apartment for 6 months. It was a substantial sum, especially for a homeless teenager. More than Angela would make at the Phoenix Group in her first 6 months, even with the raises I planned to give her as she learned new skills. That's a generous offer, I said carefully. It's blood money. Angela's voice was flat, matter of fact. She's not offering it because she loves me or wants me in her life. She's offering it because she's afraid of what I might become if I stay here with you. Afraid I might matter to someone she's disappointed. The insight was devastating in its accuracy. Gloria wasn't trying to reclaim her daughter. She was trying to eliminate a potential threat to her own position, to remove a living reminder of her failures from her mother's sphere of influence. I turned her down, Angela continued, but I thought you should know she tried. Why did you turn her down? Angela was quiet for a moment, looking out at the warehouse floor where Monty was securing the tools for the night. Because when I was living in my car, I used to drive past construction sites and watch people building things. Houses, offices, bridges, real things that would last. And I thought about how good it must feel to point to something and say, I helped make that. She turned back to me, her young face serious beyond her years. Gloria's money would have given me a place to live. But this job, this gives me a way to build a life. There's a difference. As she walked away, heading out to catch the bus back to the youth shelter where she was staying until her first paycheck allowed her to afford something better, I felt the last piece of my transformation click into place. I wasn't just punishing my daughters for their betrayal anymore. I was building something new from the ruins of their selfishness, a legacy that honored Nicholas's memory not through blood inheritance, but through earned merit and mutual respect. The Phoenix Group wasn't just rising from the ashes of the old company. It was rising from the ashes of the old family, creating something stronger and more honest from the scattered pieces of what had been broken beyond repair. And at the center of it all was a 17-year-old girl who understood the value of hard work better than the grown women who had raised me to believe that love meant accepting scraps and calling them feast. Tomorrow, I would start the paperwork to make Angela my official heir. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of the Phoenix Group's new headquarters, the renovated shell of what had once been my family home. The walls where Louise and Gloria had hung their childhood artwork now displayed blueprints and safety certificates. The kitchen where I'd prepared countless Sunday dinners had become a break room where my employees gathered for coffee and honest conversation. Nicholas's study, where he'd spent so many evenings planning projects and worrying about his workers, now served as my office. The transformation was complete and brutally symbolic. Angela sat at the mahogany conference table Nicholas had bought for the original company, her hands folded over a manila folder that contained documents that would change everything. At 18 now, she had grown into her role at Phoenix Group with the steady competence of someone who understood that opportunities were earned, not inherited. Her apprenticeship had evolved into a supervisory position, and the crew respected her not because of her relationship to me, but because she worked harder than anyone else on every job site. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice careful and measured. "Once we file these papers, there's no going back. Your daughters will know exactly where they stand." I looked at the inheritance documents she'd been reviewing, papers that would make Angela my sole heir, beneficiary of everything I'd built from the ashes of my children's betrayal. The Phoenix Group, the house proceeds invested and multiplied. The growing bank accounts that reflected 2 years of honest profit sharing and smart business decisions. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. A knock at the conference room door interrupted us. Jody Wilkerson stood in the doorway, her usual confident demeanor replaced by obvious discomfort. "Mrs. Ruth, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your daughters are here. Both of them. They're asking to see you." Through the window, I could see Louise and Gloria standing in the reception area that had once been my living room. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the space that had been transformed from their childhood sanctuary into something that no longer belonged to them. Louise clutched a folder of her own, while Gloria paced nervously, her designer suit inappropriate for the industrial setting. "Should I tell them you're in a meeting?" Jody asked. I considered the offer. For 6 months, I'd refused their calls, returned their letters unopened, ignored their increasingly desperate attempts to negotiate some kind of reconciliation, but seeing them here, in this space that represented everything they'd lost through their own choices, I felt the time had come for a final conversation. "No," I said. "Send them in. Angela, please stay. You should hear this." Angela's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded and remained seated as Jody escorted my daughters into the room. The moment they stepped inside, I could see the shock on their faces as they took in the changed space. Louise's eyes lingered on the spot where Nicholas's favorite chair had sat, now occupied by a filing cabinet. Gloria stared at the conference table where she'd done homework as a child, now covered with business documents and profit reports. "Mom," Louise began, her voice artificially bright, "the place looks different." "It looks like what it is now," I replied. "A place of business, not sentiment." Gloria's gaze fixed on Angela, her expression cycling through recognition, resentment, and something that might have been regret. "Hello, Angela." Gloria. Angela's response was polite but distant, the greeting you might give to a stranger whose name you'd forgotten. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Louise opened her folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "We've been doing some research, Mom, about the sale, about the business, about everything that's happened. We think there might be legal grounds to challenge some of the transactions." I almost laughed. After 6 months of watching their inheritance slip away, they'd finally hired lawyers to find some technicality that might restore their access to money they'd never earned. "What exactly are you challenging?" I asked. "The sale of Dad's company to you," Gloria said, finding her voice. "There may have been conflicts of interest, inadequate disclosure, fiduciary duty violations." "Stop." The word came out with enough force to make both of them take a step back. "Do you want to know what your lawyers actually told you? They told you that every transaction was completely legal, that you have no grounds for any challenge, and that pursuing litigation would be expensive and futile. But they were happy to take your money to research it anyway." Louise's face flushed red. "How could you possibly—" "Because I spoke to them first. Before you did. I wanted to make sure there were no loose ends that might give you false hope." I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the dawning realization on their faces. "Did you really think I'd spend 2 years planning this without making sure it was bulletproof?" The folder in Louise's hands trembled slightly. "This is our father's legacy, Mom. Our inheritance. You can't just—" "Your father's legacy," I interrupted, "is sitting in this room." I gestured to Angela, who sat quietly watching the proceedings with the focused attention of someone learning valuable lessons about character and consequence. "His legacy is the 47 people who have steady jobs, because I refuse to let you destroy what he built. His legacy is the families who can pay their mortgages, because I put competent management in place, instead of letting you treat the company like your personal ATM." Gloria stepped forward, her lawyer's training finally kicking in. "If this is about the money we took from the company, we can pay it back. With interest. We can make this right." $73,000, I said quietly. "That's what you stole from your dying father's company in the last year of his life. Money that could have paid for experimental treatments, private nurses, anything that might have given him more time or less pain." The number hung in the air like an accusation. I had refined my accounting over the months, tracking every fraudulent invoice, every phantom expense, every dollar they'd diverted from the company that had supported them their entire lives. "We didn't know," Louise began. "You didn't want to know. Just like you didn't want to know that your father spent his last months worrying about what would happen to his employees. Just like you didn't want to know that Angela was living in her car because her biological mother hung up on her when she asked for help." Angela's presence seemed to amplify every point I made. Here was a young woman who'd had nothing, asked for nothing except opportunity, and earned everything she'd received. The contrast with my daughters, who'd had everything, demanded more, and earned nothing, was impossible to ignore. "What do you want from us?" Gloria asked, her voice finally cracking. "What would it take for you to forgive us? To let us back into your life?" It was the question I'd been waiting for, the moment when their entitlement finally gave way to something approaching humility. But forgiveness required acknowledgement of wrongdoing, genuine remorse, and changed behavior. What I saw in their faces was desperation, not repentance. "I want you to understand," I said slowly, "that forgiveness is not the same thing as restoration. You can be sorry for your actions without being entitled to avoid their consequences." I stood up, walking to the window that looked out over the warehouse floor where Monty was training 2 new apprentices, where the workers I'd inherited from Nicholas continued to build something meaningful with their hands and their hearts. "Angela," I said without turning around, "please show them the documents." Angela opened her folder and spread the inheritance papers across the table. The legal language was complex, but the meaning was crystal clear. Everything I owned, everything I'd built, everything that represented Nicholas's true legacy would pass to her upon my death. "This is insane," Louise whispered, staring at the papers. "She's not even family." "She's more family than either of you have been in years," I replied, finally turning back to face them. "Family isn't about DNA. It's about showing up. It's about caring for each other when caring is difficult. It's about sacrifice and loyalty and putting someone else's needs ahead of your own. I moved back to the head of the table, to the position I'd earned through competence rather than inherited through birth. Angela understands what Nicholas valued: honest work, earned respect, and taking care of people who depend on you. You understood only what you could take. Gloria's face had gone pale. You're really going to leave everything to her? Everything Dad worked for? Everything Dad worked for is safe. It's thriving. It's supporting families and building communities and honoring his memory every single day. I gathered up the inheritance documents, my movements deliberate and final. What you worked for, which was nothing, you've already received. The silence that followed was different from the uncomfortable pauses earlier in the conversation. This was the silence of endings, of doors closing, of consequences finally arriving at their destination. Louise was the first to speak, her voice hollow. So that's it? We're just cut off? You cut yourselves off the day you decided my grief made me weak instead of dangerous. You cut yourselves off when you chose to steal from your dying father, rather than learn his business. You cut yourselves off when you treated his legacy like something to be liquidated, rather than honored. I walked to the door, signaling that the conversation was over. The Phoenix Group is still hiring entry-level positions. 40 hours a week, starting pay, no special treatment. If you want back into this family, that's where you start. But I won't hold my breath. As they filed out, Gloria paused at the threshold. What if we take the jobs? What if we prove we can change? I looked at her for a long moment. This daughter who had given birth to my granddaughter and then spent 17 years pretending she didn't exist, who had helped destroy her father's company, and then tried to lawyer her way back into prosperity. Then, in 20 years, if you've shown the same dedication Angela has shown in 6 months, we can have another conversation about what family means. After they left, Angela and I sat in the transformed space, surrounded by the blueprints and profit reports that represented not just a successful business, but a complete inversion of power, respect, and belonging. Do you think they'll take the jobs? She asked. I considered the question seriously. I think they're too proud to start at the bottom and too lazy to work their way up. But I hope I'm wrong. Nicholas always believed people could change if they wanted to badly enough. Angela nodded, then gathered up the inheritance papers with the same careful attention she brought to every task. Should I file these today? Yes, I said, watching the sun set through windows that had once framed my children's laughter and now illuminated the honest labor of people who understood the value of what they'd been given. It's time to make it official. The Phoenix had risen from the ashes of betrayal and entitlement, built something stronger and more honest from the ruins of what had been broken beyond repair. And at its heart sat a young woman who understood that the greatest inheritance wasn't money or property, but the knowledge that respect, like love, could only be earned through consistent action and unwavering integrity. Justice, I had learned, wasn't always loud or immediate. Sometimes it was quiet and patient, building its case one careful decision at a time until the truth became undeniable and the consequences unavoidable. Sometimes it looked exactly like a grandmother teaching her granddaughter that family was something you built, not something you were born into. Sometimes it looked exactly